Welcome to Avocational Agriculture. This is going to be an overview of the class to give you an idea of what we're going to cover in the class, talk about in the class, and kind of motivate the class to help you understand why we offer the class and why this class has this kind of weird name, Avocational Ag. What in the heck is that? Well, I'll tell you to get started, whenever I name a class, I always think about marketing. How can I, name the class so that it sounds interesting? And that's always an important thing to do. So my hope is that the class name at least sounds appealing to you. Let's jump right into it and try to understand what the class is about. So the first thing that you need to understand is the structure of agriculture in the United States. I've got some course material, some content for you to look over that talk about income distributions in agriculture, that talk about on and off farm employment in agriculture. And what you've got to remember is that virtually all farms have at least one member of the household, one family member, working in a job for pay off the farm. And a non-trivial number of those people working off the farm are working in jobs that we would call professional or management. So these are like your white-collar kind of workers. So this is based off the most recent data that I have available, and this is something that's important to understand. 45% of the principal operators work off of the farm. What in the world does that mean? Well, when the USDA goes out and surveys farms, it does it every year. They have a whole branch called National Ag Statistics, and they do a lot of survey work. They go out to the farmers, especially during the ag census years, which happen every 5 years, and they ask people, what do you do? And they sort people who work on farms into different classifications. And the main person in charge of running the farm is what they call the principal operator, who is the main decision maker running the farm. 45% of the principal operators work off of the farm. Now, I wasn't able to find the reference for this, but in the previous census of agriculture, which would be 2013 data, if I remember correctly, they flat out asked the principal operator what their primary occupation were. And about half of those principal operators back then said that their primary occupation was not farming. And this is something that's important to remember. These people have multiple jobs. And it's more than just, hey, multiple jobs. These people have full-time jobs doing something that is not farming, but they are farmers. So 45% of the principal operators work off of the farm. So 45% of the people that are the main decision makers on a farm have another form of employment that's not on their farm. It could be anything. It could be their own small business, a side hustle. Who knows what it could be? It could be part-time work. But 45% of the main decision makers on the farm also work off of the farm. And the USDA likes to classify farms into groups. They call these topologies. And over 41%, like 41 and some change of a fraction, of family farms in the U.S. fall into the off-farm occupation topology class, meaning that the principal operators declare an occupation that's not farming. So virtually half of the principal operators have a job off the farm, and that's 45%. And 41%, so almost all of those say that their main job is not farming. So 41% of the farmers say their primary job is not farming. And that's interesting, and it's important to remember when we think about the structure of agriculture in the United States. 41% of the farmers aren't actually farmers for a living. Farming is the side hustle. And this is the thing to remember. What's going on here in both these, this 41% of farms that do something besides farm for their income, it's also true for a lot of other farms. Farm households oftentimes use the income they make off of the farm to fund the farm, right? And that's a real important thing to remember. So there's tons of different ways that you can bring in money, Social Security, retirement income, things like this. And if you actually look at what goes on in most farms, it's very common to see farms using off-farm income to subsidize that farm business. And there are a lot of reasons for that. We can talk about that. And hopefully throughout the semester, you'll come to understand the implications of that and what that means for those individuals who are trying to make a living and have a farm. Now, here's a little terminology for you here. You'll see this spread throughout our talk in class, a thing called gross cash farm income. GCFI, gross cash farm income. Now this is all of the revenue that you bring in from operating a farm. And by that we mean the actual revenue you get from farming, from growing something and selling that thing, plus revenue from government payments. If you get to looking at the data, you see there are a lot of farms that get a lot of money from the government. And then there's other farm-related income. So if you have a tractor and you use that tractor on your farm and then someone pays you money to bush hog their property, that's other revenue related to farming. That's the kind of thing we're talking about there. So here we have a nice table, and what I want to point out to you here is this is from one of our references for the class, so you can read this on your own. Now, what I want you to look at here is so this is the distribution of government agricultural program payments. And what I want to point out to you is the retirement farms. 26% of the Conservation Reserve Program payments that the federal government doles out goes to people who are retired from a job and have a retirement income and also are farming. 26% of that money also goes into the off-farm occupation farms. These are that 41% that claim that their main job is not farming. So what I want to point out to you here is in this one category of government payments, Conservation Reserve Program payments, well over half of the money is going to people that I don't consider farmers. They're not. Right? If you are retired from your job and enjoying your farm in your retirement and you're putting your land in a conservation reserve program, that means you're not farming the land. Same thing goes for these off-farm occupations. These are individuals who have a job in town. They get up in the morning, they go to work, they come home, and they have a farm and they do whatever they do on their farm. And these individuals who have off-farm income that's actually subsidizing the farming, 26% of all Conservation Reserve Program payments go to these individuals. And then 23% of that money goes into low sales. And what you're going to see happening is kind of that story. In essence, the government is using Conservation Reserve Program payments to help cash flow farms that really aren't producing a lot of agricultural commodities. They're putting the reserve program money into the small farms, whereas the commodity related payments are going into the larger farms. Now, it's hard to understand what all that means without context, and to get that context, what you're going to do is take agricultural policy and you'll get a better understanding of what all these things are. So make sure you sign up for that class if you get a chance. I enjoy teaching it. It's a pretty fun class. So here is a reality of farms. All right, the reality is that most farms lose money. So I've got a link here. Let's see if I can click on the link. Okay, great. Now I've got that where you can see it on the screen. And what I want to point out to you is kind of the meaning behind this. We have three different categories of farms here: residence farms, intermediate farms, and commercial farms. So the residence farms are going to be those smaller farmers, the retirement farmers, those individuals. And what you see is that is the largest group of farms in the United States. There's over 1 million of those. That makes up more than half of all farms in the United States in 2019. The next category is the intermediate farms. There's 750,000 of those, and only 161,000 of what the USDA calls commercial farms. And I want you to look at the farm income. The residence farm has a median farm income of negative $800. This means that if you take those million farms, right, that 1 million small farms there, half of those 1 million small farms have a farm revenue, right? The money, it's not a revenue, excuse me, a farm profit. The money they make from farming and farm-related activities, that gross farm income thing we talked about earlier, is negative $800. So there you go. Of those residence farms, half of them lose more than $800 or lost more than $800 in 2019. And on this same website, you've got some historical data. You can go and pull this up, and I can assure you, if you go and pull that up, that this is a historical trend. This small category where the farms are small always just barely loses money, not quite breaks even. These farms, half of them lose money. The next category is the intermediate farm. Now, the intermediate farm, the median farm, makes a profit. But look at the size of that profit, $654. I'm sorry, $654 of profit is not worth bothering with. So I would again argue that even though they make a profit, half of them are making less than $654, which means a large chunk of them are going to be losing money. So these residence farms and these intermediate farms, half of them are just not financially viable operations, or they were not in 2019. These operations lost money. Look at the farms that made money, the large-scale farms, what the USDA calls commercial farms. Now, real quick, this is not corporate farming. I hate that term. It is a pejorative. That's an insult for those who don't know what the word pejorative means. When someone says corporate farms and corporate agriculture, they're usually talking about large businesses that process farm products, because the overwhelming majority of all farms, even large commercial farms, are sole proprietorships, individual owned businesses. And when you run across a farm that is a corporation, they're just family farms that incorporated using what they call a closely held corporation. And so they incorporated for estate planning reasons or for tax reasons. So to call farms corporate is just an insult. There's virtually no such thing as corporate farms. Just a tiny percentage of farms are corporate farms. Now there are large-scale commercial farms that produce a lot of product. That's different from corporate. It's still a family running a farm virtually all the time, 99% of the time. These farms have a nice, big, healthy $139,000 a year median farm income. Hey, that's awesome. That's making some serious buck right there. This kind of farm is worth operating. So, half of them made more than $139,000 in 2019. That's fantastic. Now, if you break those numbers down for all farms, you see that the profit for farms, for all farms, all these 2 million farms, was $296. So it's fair to say, and again, if you go back and look historically, this is a pattern that's historical and it's been holding for many years. Half of all farms lose money. If you're driving down the road, you see a farm, and there's a farm right beside it, odds are one of them lost money in 2019. And that's important to understand. Now, here's the next line, and I want to show you this. Look at the off-farm income for the residence farm type. The median off-farm income for the residence farm was $100,000. So half of them made more than $100,000, half of them made less than $100,000. And that's nice. And what you're going to notice is the earned income. Now, there's two types of incomes according to the IRS. There's earned and unearned. I don't like that distinction because it gives this impression you didn't work for it. Unearned income is income from investments. Earned income is income from working a job or running a business. I mean, you earned your income if you put it in an investment. That's still earned in my book, but that's not how they classify it. And what you're going to notice is that these residence farms have a very high earned income. These are people who don't farm. They have a job off the farm. That job pays well. The median number there is $86,000 a year. So, half of those 1 million farms are making more than $86,000 a year off farm. All right. Are you beginning to get a picture of this? And, I don't see this as a problem. It's just the way things are. And it's important that we understand the reality that we're operating in. Now, if you look at those intermediate farms, that number is also a nice, healthy $57,000 a year. And if you ask me, who are the farmers that I had the most sympathy for, it's these right here, because they're working that off-farm job. They're trying really hard to make a farm work, and it's not working very well. All right, these are the ones who are really kind of struggling out there, whereas this other group has an off-farm income of $45,000 a year, plus they've got that healthy on-farm income, and so they're doing great. If you look at the total household income there, $190,000 median household income. So half of these farms are making more than $190,000 a year. If you look at it for all farms, that median household income is $83,000 a year. What I want you to understand is that is a huge number. Right now, as I record this, the median household income in the town I live in at the moment is It's a relatively wealthy town, all things considered. It's well over $50,000. And the state I'm in Tennessee, the median household income is barely above $40,000. And if you go to the wealthiest county in the state, it's Williamson County, where Franklin, Tennessee is located. The median household income is above $83,000. So what we're seeing here is that nationwide, these farmers are in effect living in the richest county in Tennessee. They're doing very well. And I kind of like that. I like seeing people do well. I hope that you wake up one day and realize that you're making $83,000 a year in household income. All right, let's get rid of this screen and go to the next thing. So I got a question for you. Well, why do most farms lose money? Now, if this were in a classroom environment, I'd stop for a moment and we would brainstorm. I'd say, well, why do you think most farms lose money? What's going on here? And usually students come up with some really good answers to explain that, and I'll show you some of the common answers that I get when I ask this question among students. Because it turns out there are actually some rational reasons to expect businesses to lose money, whether they're a farm or some other type of business. So I call this section of the slides, I call this the money pit. The first reason why farms lose money is because the USDA definition of a farm is stupid. Do you know what the USDA definition of a farm is? Well, you know now. It's right there on the screen. According to the USDA, if an operation has the potential to generate $1,000 in revenue, not profit, revenue. That's different, okay? They would call it gross receipts, or the big buzzword we mentioned earlier, what was it again? The gross cash farm income, GFCI, right? The gross cash farm income. And you don't even have to earn that much. You just have to have the potential to earn that much. So you could have no revenue and the USDA would still call you a farm. That number was set in 1974. As I'm recording this, that was 47 years ago. And that number has never been adjusted for inflation. This number is just stupid. So if you were to correct for inflation, $1,000 in the year 2020 would be the equivalent to $180 in 1974. To put this in context, the minimum wage in 1974 was $2 an hour. I don't know the current minimum wage off the top of my head, but it's a lot more than $2 an hour. Median household income nationwide in the U.S. in 1974 was $11,100. So that revenue number was 9% of median household income. Median household income for the most recent year that I had data before I put these slides together, 2019, was $68,703. So that's a nationwide number. Well, what's 1,000 out of 68,000? What's that as a percentage? It's trivial. So the number $1,000 is just absurdly small. It's a stupid number, a complete nonsense. $1,000 in potential. What even does that mean? Second, as you can see from the numbers that we looked at, most farms are very, very small. Most farms are tiny. That's a side effect from the USDA's definition of a farm. About half of all farms had a gross farm income, gross cash farm income. I think I got the letters wrong there, right? The cash receipts, the income from farming and subsidies and all of these things, 48.4% in 2015 had a gross farm income, cash income of less than $10,000. The median was $11,000. And 21.8%, a little more than 20%, had that number was between $10,000 and $50,000. That tells you that somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% of all farms had less than $50,000 in revenue. And this is something, hey, $50,000 sounds like a lot of money, but $50,000 in revenue ain't nothing, okay? It's nothing. You are not going to succeed at life if $50,000 in revenue is all you can muster. And I'm not saying that to be harsh, because revenue is not income. Revenue is not profit. You have to back your expenses out, and farming is expensive. And so if 70% of the farms in the country in 2015 had less than $50,000 in revenue, how can we expect them to have made any money? The equipment you use to farm is just too expensive for that amount of revenue to ever pay off. All right, so here's one that most of my students pick up on pretty quickly because they've heard stories about how to dodge income taxes. You can't really dodge income taxes. All you can really do is shift income taxes in time. So sometimes you will attempt to lower this year's profit in order to decrease this year's tax bill. For example, if you know you're going to buy some seed to plant in the spring, you can go ahead and buy that seed in December. So if in the current year you've made a lot of money, you've had a high revenue and your profits are good, you can go ahead and buy the inputs you need, seed, feed, fertilizer, whatever, at the tail end of the current calendar year in order to lower your profit for the current calendar year, because those expenses will land on this calendar year, even though they're for next year's crop. So you can time shift your tax burden. So you spend extra money. It's a cash flow thing. You spend extra money in years where you've made money so that perhaps if you don't do as well next year, and this is done simply so you can attempt to time shift your taxes. You might, for example, have a grain bin full of corn and you decide, I've made plenty of money. I've had plenty of revenue this year. I'm going to wait till January to sell it because I don't want my taxes to be too high this year. Now, you need to show a profit once every 5 years or so, and it's real common for people to use tricks like this to minimize their tax bill. Perfectly legal, nothing wrong with it. I wouldn't even call it a loophole. It's just something that people have figured out a long time ago, and they do. So maybe half those farms are losing money this year and making money next year, and they're kind of swapping, if that makes sense. The next thing is land appreciation. A lot of farms, if you really look critically at what the business model is, it's just putting sweat equity into a long-term real estate speculation. And something that I teach about in my economics class, if a business can cover fixed cost, right? If you can pay for all your fixed cost and pay for some of your variable cost, it's profitable to stay open in the short run. And what you do is you use your off-farm income to supplement losses in those years where you don't have enough farm income to break even. And you end up putting yourself in a bit of a cash flow pinch sometimes. But there's this old saying that farmers live poor and they die rich, because in the end, you've got a farm, and farms tend to be valuable and land goes up in value. And so from a pure financial model standpoint, maybe you're not farming for money. Maybe you're farming to afford the land so that you'll make a lot of money one day when you sell the land or when you die and your kids get a ton of money. The land might be your actual retirement. Risk management. Risk management. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say you got a job in town and you make decent money at that job in town, and you're able to operate that farm at a small loss or a break even for a number of years. And then one day you have some good luck, right? You have a year where there's trade assistance or coronavirus assistance, or you have a big crop insurance claim. And because of that, you get a windfall gain. Maybe there's a huge spike in prices. So you run along with this farm and it doesn't make any money for 5 years. And then one day you look up and, hey, it's the coronavirus, and the government gives you a $20,000 check just because you happen to have a farm. And you see this massive windfall gain. So it's a way of kind of mitigating risk, or rather, it's a way of taking a risk, hoping for a big payoff, knowing you already have your regular job that's going to make you good money. Hope that makes sense. Development. What happens if someone builds a big interstate right across your farm? Well, it's terrible. You got to sell the farm. Yeah, but if there's an exit there, that farm's worth a fortune. So when development comes out your way, if you've got the land, you get paid. So it's a risk thing where you take a risk in order to get a reward. And if you can afford to cash flow the payment on the land for 30 years, one of these things is going to happen. It's going to pay off big, and you'll be glad you did. So let's define a term. This is the word avocation, or maybe it's pronounced avocation. It really doesn't matter. Basically, if you look up a dictionary definition, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get that it is a hobby, something that you do in addition to your vocation, something that you do because you're passionate about it. And if it generates revenue, we have a fancy new buzzword for this. We call it a side hustle. So the reality of this class is it is a class about agriculture, about farming as a side hustle. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to farm. I am not the farm expert. What I'm going to talk about is the financial management of this farm, because that is what I concern myself with as an agribusiness professor. I have no idea what feed ration you should feed your animal. You can look that up on any extension website. My concern is, let's talk about the financial model, and let's be very clear on how the business makes money and what we do about those business losses. And if you're running a farm, and if that farm is just simply too small to break even or support a family, and you have to have a job off the farm in order to afford to farm, then that farm is not your job. You are not a farmer. You are a hobbyist. You are doing this because you're passionate about it. It is your side hustle at best. It's something you do in addition to your vocation. Is that a bad thing? Absolutely not. For me, the problem becomes when people get too caught up in the emotion of farming and identify themselves as a farmer and tie their identity to farming and refuse to look at the business with a critical eye and then continue to persist in working very hard and not making a lot of money. I'm not opposed to hard work, but if you're going to work hard, it better pay off financially. Working hard for no money is not worth the trouble. I don't like doing it. I don't recommend you do it either. And here's the way I like to break it down. I call it boats versus goats. And simply, it boils down to this. You will have a better life if you choose to live your life in the real world instead of living a fantasy. Don't look at the world with rose-colored glasses. Some people have boats. They get their boat out on the weekend. They go do boat things. Maybe they water ski. Maybe they fish. Whatever it is they do out on their boat. Maybe it's a pontoon boat and they just go float around on the water and drink beer. It's their boat. They can do what they want with it. Some people have goats. And they go out on the weekends. They feed their goats. They work their goats. They take care of their goats. They fix the fences. And they have a lot of fun doing things with their goats. It's fun to raise an animal, to take an animal from a newborn, from a baby, and watch it grow and then be able to sell it one day. Both of these things, boats and goats, can be very expensive. They don't have to be, they can be, because your boat could just, be a canoe or something, right? You just throw in the river next to your house. But what I see happening is I see people buy a boat, and after they buy the boat, they say, oh, hey, I need a truck to tow my boat. So they go buy a trailer and a truck and tow their boat to wherever. And I see people who get a goat and they say, well, you know what? I've got a car and I can't carry a goat around in my car. I got to go buy a truck and at the very least put some rails in the back of the truck so I can haul my goats around. So they go out and they buy a truck. I see people who engage in big, grand trips when they go fishing, and they got to spend a lot of money on fuel and hotel rooms for overnight trips. I see people going to goat shows who have to drive their big heavy-duty truck to wherever the show is and get a hotel room and maybe buy an RV or a camper so they can kind of camp on site. I see that happen. Food and feed, right? If you're fishing on your boat, you're feeding fish, right? You've got to buy bait. You've got to take care of the animals. You've got to buy all this expensive gear that goes with it. If you have a boat, all the expensive gear that goes with having a boat. If you have goats, all the expensive gear that goes with it. Injuries. A lot of people get a fish hook in their eye and end up having, permanent damage. A lot of people get injured by their animals, stepped on, that kind of stuff, right? There's all these things that bring expenses. And what tends to happen is that when a hobby generates revenue, we fixate on the revenue and we use the revenue to justify an expensive hobby. And that's okay if you want to do that, but I would prefer that you live in the real world and you realize when you're doing it and you are able to stop back and say, you know what? This is a hobby. I love doing it. It's okay that it doesn't make enough money to pay for itself. It's not the end of the world. What I don't want you doing is using the fact that the hobby, the avocation, brings in revenue to cause your household expenses to get out of line and cause you to waste a bunch of money that might be better used somewhere else. I just want you to face it with a little bit of reality. What do I mean? I had a friend one day say this to me, roughly this exact same thing right here. He had gotten a bunch of backyard chickens. I like backyard chickens. They're kind of cool. He said, oh, he loves it. Right? His kids love playing with the chickens. He said it's a pet that poops a nickel every day. And his justification was, well, I'm going to have pets for my kids, and this way I get eggs out of it. Now, the feed cost on the chicken is about 7 cents a day. So that egg lost him 2 cents a day. And so I look at that justification and I say, that's not really a justification to have a farm, which is what a backyard chicken operation is. All right. It's great. You can eat your own eggs, and that's cool and that's fun. But if you're going to look at it from a financial standpoint and tell me, well, it's okay because it's a pet that poops a nickel every day. So like, yeah, it costs you 7 cents a day to feed the darn thing. You lost money on it. You were better off without it. Hey, that kid won the cattle show. He got a $1,000 prize. What did it cost to raise that cow? What did it cost to buy all the equipment, the trucks, the farm, everything you needed to raise that cow? What about the 50 kids who spent the exact same money and didn't win? Right? Winning a show is a competitive thing. It's got an element of luck and randomness to it. It takes years to get the experience to get good enough to win those shows. And you can't look at the prize money and justify it. There's very few competitive ventures like that where the prize money actually justifies it. We're not talking about NASCAR races or something like that, or things where you get multi-million-dollar sponsor deals to put on the side of your goat. And hey, if you want to do a cattle show, awesome, go for it. Go show your cattle. There's all kind of good reasons to do it. Learning the value of work, for example, having some responsibility, teaching a kid how to do something, all great reasons. The prize at the end is not why you enter a cattle show. Because people would enter the show if the prize was $20 or if the prize was $1,000. They entered the show in order to compete, in order to develop some skills, in order to exercise mental and physical muscles and to develop as a person. Those are the reasons why you do it. It's not a financial thing. It's not a business. It is a hobby. It is an avocation. Hey, I already had the land, and because I got the land, I need a tractor. So that cost of running my farm doesn't count. No, man. Every cost counts. You can't ignore cost. When you start ignoring cost, you start spending a lot of extra money you didn't need. So you can't justify and say, well, I already had the land, and so the big cost was a cost I was going to pay anyways. Because that land you could have sold, put that money into some type of an investment, and it could have generated you money, right? There is always a cost. You can't ignore the cost. I'm glad I bought that diesel truck. Now I've got plenty of power to fill my cattle trailer. And you pull the trailer to the sale barn once a year, and it's loaded with 5 little tiny steers that don't make enough money to justify that giant truck. And again, if you want to buy a big truck with a diesel motor, none of my business. Go right ahead. Knock yourself out. But be honest with yourself and say, I wanted to buy the truck because I wanted the truck, and so I bought the truck. And don't use the fact that you've got 3 or 4 cows that you're going to haul off to a sale barn once a year to justify buying a big expensive diesel truck. Just be honest with yourself. That's all I'm asking you to do. That's it. Just be honest with yourself. Income tax. All right. All income is subject to federal income tax. It's illegal to hide money from the government. You have to pay your taxes. It's perfectly legal to deduct legitimate expenses so that you can lower your tax bill. That's fine. Once upon a time, the IRS would allow you to deduct hobby expenses from hobby revenue. So if you had a hobby that made you $1,000 and you spent $1,500 on it, you could put it out there as revenue neutral. And that has changed. The IRS now requires you to submit hobby income as income, and you cannot deduct expenses from your hobby against your hobby income. The end result is you're paying a full tax on all of that income, even though you had a lot of expenses to go with it. So if you have a hobby and it generates revenue of any significance, you really need to go ahead and treat it like a business, at least at tax time. Treat it like a business. Count all the costs. Make choices that make money. Don't overspend. Keep records. Expect a return on your investment and don't lie on your taxes. Treat it like a business. especially if you're going to use the notion of I've got revenue from my hobby to justify expenses, then treat it like an actual business. Keep the records. File the proper tax forms. That's all I'm asking you to do. And if you don't want to, it's your life. Do what you want. It's fine with me. We're going to learn a lot of other cool stuff that's going to help you in the business world anyways this semester. So don't sweat it if you don't want to treat your hobby like a business. And don't sweat it if you want to use your hobby to justify your decision making. It's your hobby. You can do what you want. I'm just saying maybe you'd have more success if you did look at it from a cold, analytical business perspective, as opposed to a, hey, it's fun, so I'm going to do it anyways. All right. I will see you in the next one.